Hi everybody, welcome to session 2 of our series, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Content Management Systems, but We're Too Afraid to Ask. My name is Deane Barker. I'm the Global Director of Content Management for Optimizely. We make a content management product called Content Cloud. Today we're going to be talking about developments and trends in content management, both from an industry perspective and a technology perspective, because changes in both have really adjusted how we look at content management, how we purchase content management, how we host content management. Just by way of an agenda, we're going to have 3 major sections here. We're going to talk about money, essentially, licensing, subscription, implementation, and hosting. If you're looking to implement a content management system, obviously that's going to cost some money. I'm going to tell you who you are going to pay for what. We're going to talk about coupling models, which is going to feel weirdly technical, but it's important. We talked in session 1 about the difference between content and an artifact based on content. So your content record is kind of an abstract, pure example of content, and then a web page, for example, is an artifact made from that. We're going to talk about the difference between management and delivery, and the difference between management and delivery is critical to understanding how content management systems are architected today and how they're purchased and how they're implemented. And then finally, we're going to talk about CMP, which stands for Content Marketing Platform. CMP and what I call the first 85%. And I'll explain that when I get to it. You may not know what a content marketing platform is. It's a separate genre of enterprise content software. You might not know what it is. I'll explain what it does, and there's a very good chance you'll think I really have a need for that at my organization. But let's get started. Let's talk about money. Let's talk about licensing, subscription, implementation, and hosting, or who gets paid. So let's first start out with how you buy the software, right? How do you actually pay for the software? What are the different models for paying for the software? Well, the first model for paying for the software is not to pay for it. It's the open source model. There are many open source content management systems. It's a very popular genre for open source software. Open source software is provided for free by the community. You can download it and use it. There's no upfront fee. You don't have to pay for it, but technically, if you make changes to it, you have to publish your changes. Not a lot of people do, but you technically have to. You really don't have any support. You have support from the community. If you need support from the product, you've either got to find kind of free support online, read the documentation yourself, or perhaps hire a consultant or a company that is an expert in that software. So that's the open source model. The next model is one that was very popular, is now falling out of favor. This is the one-time license model. This is when you would pay a fee to take possession of the software code and use the software. So let's just pick a number, $25,000. Let's say you would pay $25,000 to use the software. Well, you have to bring your own hosting. You're only going to pay this one-time fee. And then sometimes you have to pay what's called fractional subscription. This was very common. You could just pay the one-time fee and then have no other relationship with a software vendor. But most people, when they buy enterprise software, want some continuing relationship with the software vendor. They want upgrades, they want license keys, they might want support. In that case, there was often fractional annual subscription. 20% was very common. Sometimes it was 18%, sometimes it was 22%. I saw a vendor once that was 30%, but let's say it was 20% and you paid $25,000 for your software, you would need to pay $5,000 a year. And you would get access to benefits. Often you would get access to like a testing environment or a development environment. You would get upgrades if they release new versions of the software. So you would get a number of things for that. But this was the one-time license fee with fractional subscription. This was very common. It's much less common now. The most common model, which is almost becoming universal, is just annual subscription, which means you pay the same fee every year. So before, you paid $25,000 up front, then $5,000 a year. Now you might pay $20,000 a year. Now, you may look at that and think, well, that's terrible. I'm paying more money. Why am I paying more money? What you're paying for there is a much closer relationship with a software vendor over time. Nobody really buys enterprise software anymore. They just rent it. So with annual subscription, you would pay this fee every year. In exchange for that, you would certainly get upgrades, you would certainly get support, and then you almost always get a hosting environment. So you actually have a place where you can put the software and run the software. Not only that, this hosting environment is probably optimized for the software. It probably has some extra tools and services that are provided to websites running in their environment to enhance it. So you're not really just paying money for software. What you're doing is you're paying a yearly fee for access to an environment, kind of an incubator for your content management system to run in. So those are the 3 biggest payment models. Again, open source is perennial. It'll be around forever. One-time license there in the middle, very much falling out of favor now, and pretty much everything is moving to an annual subscription model. So now we love to think that this stuff is out of the box and you just take it out of the box and it works. Unfortunately, that's rarely the case. You usually always have to customize the software to do what you want. If you have a very, very simple use case, there are very simple software packages, kind of website builder packages that you can just use. You just pay a fee and you use them. But usually, if you're talking enterprise software or a non-trivial usage of a CMS, you have to implement it. And implementation is an example of the software taken and customized for your use. Now, the software in and of itself is really just a platform or a set of materials. It's like if you were to deliver a bunch of wood and trusses and windows to an empty lot. Well, I mean, there's all the materials and all the tools, you're all ready to go, but someone's got to build the house. And so the implementation is the actual building of the house. And who does this work? Who actually takes the software and does the work to get it up and running? Three options here. These are the three major options. The first option is you. I mean, you could buy the software and then you could just do the work yourself. If you have developers sitting around, they could implement the software themselves. Unfortunately, this never really works well. And the reason why it works is twofold. Number one, these are complicated software platforms. And this may sound cynical, and I don't mean it to, but for you to implement it well, you have to screw up about 5 times. And if this one implementation is going to be your production implementation, it's probably not going to go great. Your first implementation of anything is not going to be wonderful, and this is going to be your production implementation. Also, do you have the time? And probably you don't. Understand that you need probably multiple developers sitting around with nothing to do for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months. And most people don't have that. If you had the time to do it, you probably would have already done it. So the idea of you implementing a CMS, it is theoretically possible, not very common, I'm going to say. I have seen some situations when it worked out well, when you have a large organization that's willing to invest a lot of time in training and kind of trial and error and bring their development team up to speed. Normally it doesn't work great. The next option would be to have the software vendor themselves do it, which means the company that sold you the software is also going to do the services to customize it. This may seem very attractive to a lot of people because these people know the software perfectly and I can get it all in a one-stop shop. Unfortunately, it's suboptimal. And the reason for that is because all of your eggs are in one basket. The person implementing the software is the same person who built the software. And what if you don't like what they did? Where can you go? Is there an option for you to go somewhere else? The other problem that you have is that software vendors tend not to be very creative about their own software. So if their software doesn't work the way you want it to, they have very little incentive to try to make you happy. They have a great incentive to just reinforce the product and tell you, well, this is just the way the product works. They're very unlikely to admit faults in their own product. Where other people who are really, they're concentrating on the end goal, they can be much more creative in solving your problems, even going around the CMS when that's the right answer, and sometimes it is. Software vendor doing the work, and if you have the software vendor do your work, you have to ask yourself, are they a services company or are they a product company? And that's a valid question because there are some companies that sell their software at break even or even at a loss just to get the services work. So they're really a services company who sells some software to get you to pay for services. So you could have the software vendor do the work. The most common option is going to be this third option, which is you're going to have a third party or what they call a partner do the work. Every enterprise software company has this network of service companies around it that provide services for that software. I did this for years. I owned one of these companies for 15 years, and we worked with what was called Episerver at the time. Episerver became Optimizely, but we became Episerver's very first North American partner in 2008. We built the company around Episerver's content management system. I worked with it at that company for 14 years. 80 to 85% of our revenue was based on implementations of that product. So this is very common. Every single vendor is going to have a network of partners. So the question is, how much experience do they have? You really want to find a partner who's done quite a few implementations. This is another example of why it's not great for you to do it, because you're only doing one implementation, whereas a third-party partner might do 5, 6, 7 a year. So they have an enormous amount of experience with the platform. And also, how deep is the ecosystem? Always have a plan B. So if you're working with a partner and you don't like what they're doing, you have to be able to bail out. So you want to find out how big the ecosystem is and what your options are. 10 years ago, I put a company into a very small content management system, just a company of about 35 people, and they used the vendor for their services, and they quickly overwhelmed the vendor. And so the middle option there, they used the middle option. And they came to me and they said, okay, we need to find a third-party partner. So they wanted to go with the option on the right. So I said, okay. So I went to find them one, and there weren't any. As near as I could tell, there was no one actively doing work with this content management system besides the software vendor. So that's an example of a very small or shallow ecosystem. You really want to take a look and think, how many people are working with the software? If we don't like the vendor, what can we do? Who can we go to for this? So you really want to judge the ecosystem. So those are really the three biggest implementation models. There might be a fourth, I'm unaware of one, but having you implement the software, never a great idea. Software vendor, not really a great idea either. I maintain that third-party partner system is the most common. Here's an example of the partner page on our website on optimizely.com. If you do go to the website of an enterprise content management system, just look for a option called partners. I'm sure it'll be there. You see ours up the top there, right in the middle. That's what they call people who specialize in their software. And they usually have some kind of business arrangement with the company. Often they have to pay a fee to the company in order to be listed on their page. Sometimes they have to pay a commission fee to the company. Sometimes if they sell the company's product, they get a commission from the company. But the relationship is loose. They're not owned by the company. The company has no vested financial interest in the success of the partner. But this is very common. Okay, so we've talked about licensing and subscription, and we've talked about implementation models. Let's talk about hosting models. And you may be thinking, like, this is a little technical. Why do we have to understand this? Because the website has to live somewhere. After you build a website on a content management system, it has to be deployed and has to live somewhere. It has to exist on a computer which is available to the public internet. So the question is, where does it live? And it's important to understand the models here because they speak a lot about the industry and how these arrangements are kind of architected. The first model is what I'm going to call the on-premise model or the on-prem model. I have the S in parentheses there because after I gave this presentation once, somebody told me that a premise is a statement of truth. Premises is a physical location, and that's really what we're talking about. So it should be called on-premises, but nobody says that. They say on-premise or on-prem. Now, with an on-prem model, you're paying a fee. Usually it's that middle option, that one-time license fee. You're paying a fee to the vendor, and they're giving you the software, and you're taking receipt of that software, and you're building the website yourself. You're doing all the work, and you're hosting it yourself. So with the on-prem model, you don't really have a continuing relationship with the vendor. You may pay them some fractional subscription for updates, maybe some support, but really you don't have this close continuing relationship with the vendor. So what does the vendor do? Like, what's their role in your ongoing success? Well, they cash your check is what they do. They take the money. And so this model is becoming less and less common. With open source software, this is the model, because with open source software, you just get the code and you do with it what you want. But it used to be that enterprise content management system vendors would do an on-premise model. You pay them a one-time fee and they'd give you the software and you'd have to host it yourself. It's becoming less and less common. What's much more common now is what's called platform as a service, or PaaS. It's spelled P-A-A-S. It's pronounced P-A-S-S, PaaS. With platform as a service, you're paying an annual subscription fee to the vendor, and you are getting receipt of the software, and you are building your website yourself, or having a third party, but you're building it, and then you're deploying it to the vendor's cloud, the vendor's hosting environment. So they will host it for you. Now, the vendor both hosts it, makes it available on the public internet, and then also they usually provide some value-added services around it. Like, for instance, if you use Optimizely Content Cloud, when you deploy to our cloud, we have several different services that run in production. For example, our search service. We have a big search engine service that can help search your website. That's something that runs in our cloud. So we have a set of services that value add to your implementation. And this is known as platform as a service. You still have code level access to the software. You still build something with it, but then you deploy it to the vendor's cloud. The third model is what we're going to call SaaS. SaaS, S-A-A-S, it's pronounced SaaS, S-A-S-S. With this, you're not getting the code. You're not really building. You're getting a service which you can kind of point and click around and configure. The building you still have to do, but you do that somewhere else. The content management system itself is not code that you receive. It's really a service that's provided for you. So you configure this service, and the vendor then provides this service. Now, with something like this, sometimes We'll talk about this more when we get to management and delivery, but often software as a service in the content management space is just management. They don't actually do any delivery, and I'll talk about that in a bit. There are a series of like website builders. These are companies like Squarespace and Wix that actually provide both management and delivery. So you pay a certain fee per month and you get like a whole website building system. And so this is software as a service. You can't write code against these systems. They're really just provided to you as a service. So let's contrast PaaS software and SaaS software because there are advantages and disadvantages to each. The advantage to PaaS software is really unlimited integration. You get code level access, you can code against it, you can do some really amazing things. You can do very, very complicated, unique work with a PaaS platform. The downside to a PaaS platform is, remember, you're receiving the code, so you actually are going to have to do some development. There's more development required with a PaaS platform. But if you'll note, I did put a question mark there, and I'm going to return to that question mark in a second, because whether or not there is actually more development required on a PaaS platform is very much up for debate. On the right side, on a SaaS platform, theoretically, less development required. Remember, you just kind of point and click around an interface. Question mark there too, for the same reason I had the question mark before. I will make an argument that sometimes it's not any less work. A clear benefit of SaaS platforms is instant on functionality. Normally, if you go to a SaaS vendor's website, you can get an account just with a credit card without even talking to a human, and then suddenly have an account. You'll get like an email that says, here's your link to your new account. The downside to SaaS platform is there are functional limits there. Remember, this isn't software you write against or build on. This is software you just kind of configure, so it can only do so much. And then the other thing is that most SaaS platforms are multi-tenant, which means you exist in the framework of a larger application along with many other customers. And if one of those other customers, you're sharing the system with these customers, and if one of those other customers does something to make that system unstable or slow, you could suffer for that. So when we talk about on-premise, SaaS, and PaaS, let's compare these two housing situations. So on the left, we have SaaS, which is really an apartment. You cannot do much. If you rent an apartment, you're renting a space inside a larger building, but you can't really do much with the space. I mean, you couldn't even paint an apartment without like getting permission from the landlord. Certainly can't knock down a wall. So I mean, what can you do in an apartment? I don't know, move some furniture around, put paintings on the walls. I mean, there's a limited amount of things you can do, but you can move into an apartment like right away. You could sign a lease and move in tomorrow. It's very quick, very lightweight, and you can break your lease and move out. In the middle, we have a condo, which is PaaS. It's not instant on like an apartment. You have to buy a condominium and, I don't know, get a mortgage and go through escrow and all of that. But once you have the condominium, you can do whatever you want inside your condo. You can knock down walls, you can do anything you want. It's your space. You still exist in the framework of a larger structure, but your space is your space and you can do whatever you want. If you want to put a racquetball court or a bowling alley or whatever, as long as you don't bother the people around you, you're good. On the right side, we have on-prem or on-premise. This is like a house. If you build a house, you buy a spot of land and you build a house, you can do anything you want with that house. You don't share it with anybody. You can knock it over if you feel like it. So on-premise would be a house. Now, the problem with on-premise is like the land is your problem. Now you have to mow the lawn. You have to pay property tax on the land and assessments for the road. I mean, there's a whole lot of infrastructure that comes with owning some land that you build a house on, but you have complete, total control over that. So those are the three major hosting models, and the hosting model that you pick very much depends how you pay for the software and your relationship with the software vendor over time. Okay, now let's move into coupling models, and this may get a little technical, but stick with me, because how coupling models, how the coupling of a CMS is architected very much depends on how you view that system and how you build with that system. Remember from session 1, we talked about the difference between content and artifact. Content is the pure content object in the abstract. Artifact is something made from that content object that a human can consume. Most commonly, it would be a web page. So the question is, management, we manage that content, then we deliver artifacts. How do those two sides relate? And then where does the artifact get generated? Okay, so let's step back and define management and delivery a little bit more. Theoretically, if we have a publish button kind of right in the middle, everything we do to the left of that publish button is management. Everything we do with our content, we model our content, we aggregate our content, we edit it, we do all this stuff, and then we hit publish. Once we've done that, we're done with management. Now we're delivering that content. Somebody is consuming that content. So I always maintain that management is to the left of the publish button, delivery is to the right of the publish button. Let's talk about management. management for a second. Management are all the very boring but necessary tools that a content management system has to have. Things like content modeling, where you define your types and your properties and how your content's organized. Things like CRUD operations, CRUD, create, update, and delete, the basic work of writing and reading from the repository. Editorial tools like versioning and auditing and approvals and permissions and preview, just the things that allow your editors to work with content. Aggregation tools, being able to organize your content into menus and collections and trees and lists and taxonomies and tags. Things like dependency management, like if you're going to delete a piece of content, the system will tell you, you're using this content over here, so don't delete that. These are all management things, and these are, and this is going to sound a little snarky, and I don't mean it to, but these are boring, and they're really meant to be boring. Management should be boring and predictable, and dependable and reliable. I maintain that management should be boring like a trip to the dentist is boring. If somebody comes back from the dentist and they say it was a very exciting trip to the dentist, that's never good. You never want an exciting trip to the dentist. You want a boring trip to the dentist, and this is what management should be. Now, on the other side, you have delivery. Delivery is the exciting stuff. If you're a marketer, you're all about delivery. Delivery is after we get the content out there, what are we going to do with it? And this is things like response logic. Response logic is a thing that we never think about, but if somebody requests a URL on your website, like they request /products, well, response logic is your system determining what content it's going to take to service that request. If somebody wants /products, what do they want? What content are we going to give them? How are we going to organize that content? Things like personalization, A/B testing, multivariate testing, analytics, search, tracking your customer behavior in your CDP, all of those really interesting, sexy marketing things, that happens in delivery. And the last metaphor I'll put for this is, let's take produce on the shelf of a grocery store. Once produce is on the shelf, we're going to call that kind of our publish button. Everything that happened to get the produce to the shelf in the grocery store is management. This goes all the way back to tilling the field and planting the crops and watering the crops and harvesting the crops and storing them and transferring them to the market and storing them in the grocery store and then getting them out on the shelf. That's all management. Once they're on the shelves, everything we do to get them off the shelf, to get them sold, is really delivery. And that's things like how the grocery store is laid out, the promotions that the grocery store puts in the newspaper, the signage inside the grocery store, how the products are labeled, all the experience of shopping at the grocery store. That's all delivery. So this is the difference between management and delivery. Now, if we split these two things apart, and we talk about management and delivery, let's talk about how those things relate, because this has changed over time. We're going to go way back in time now, and I hate to use this phrase, but we're going to go way back in time to the turn of the century. I've been working in content management since about 95. So back in 97, 98, 99, maybe the early 2000s, content management systems were decoupled. A decoupled content management system had separate environments for management and delivery. So your content management system, the brains of the operation, signified there by the head with the gears in it. So the brains of the operation were in the CMS. And when you hit publish, what the CMS did is it bundled up that stuff into an artifact, like it wrote out a web page, and it pushed it over onto another environment. Like it literally pushed HTML files out to a web server somewhere. Really, early content management systems were just big static site generators. Now, the problem with this model was that once we put the content somewhere, it was disconnected from the repository, so we couldn't do interesting things with it. We couldn't keep track of it. We just kind of threw it over the wall and hope it worked out. So this was a decoupled environment, two environments, management and delivery. The CMS is the brains of the operation. It's pushing artifacts over to delivery. We determined, however, that we really wanted to keep track of our content after we published it. We wanted to keep a connection to it, because then we could do interesting things with it. We could modify it, or we could secure it and make people log in before they view it. And so early in this century, I would say 2003, 2004, 2005, systems like WordPress and Drupal became popular, and these were coupled systems. And this is still the predominant model today. Optimizely Content Cloud is a coupled system. In this system, the management and delivery are together. So the public is getting content from the same system where your editors are working with content. So the public is going to your website, and if you want to modify the content on your website, you too go to your website. You just log in and you go to the backside, the admin side, or whatever they call it, and you change the content. Now, the benefit of this is that by keeping track of our content, we can do interesting things to it. We have an active relationship with our content after we publish it, we still have a connection to it, and we can do much more interesting things. Again, this is the predominant model, and you may be looking at this and saying, well, yes, this is what I understand a content management system to be. This may be the only model you've ever worked with. But we were decoupled, and then we moved to coupled, and now, interestingly, we're sort of moving back to decoupled, but with a twist. The latest development, probably in the last 5 years, is what we're calling headless CMS. It's called a headless CMS because somebody decided that delivery was the head, and we were going to chop it off, and we were going to call that headless. A headless content management system goes back to being decoupled. You have a management environment, and then you have delivery environments. But instead of the brains of the organization being in the management environment, the brains are really on the delivery environment. In this case, there's 2 delivery environments. Let's say we have a website and we have a mobile app. Both of those are developed applications, and they're just using the content management system as a data source. They're just using it really as a database, a place to store their content. So in this case, you have a website that somebody has programmed and a bunch of logic in this website, and it's just pulling its content out of a content management system, out of a headless content management system. And same for the mobile app. And this is why, when I talked about the difference between PaaS and SaaS, I put a question mark about more or less development required. And the reason for that is that most headless CMSs are SaaS platforms. And headless CMS vendors are prone to claim that their systems require less development. And that's true insofar as the management is concerned. They have some functional limits, but management gets up and running very quickly. Unfortunately, you still have to build the delivery. Just because you have the management running doesn't mean you can deliver. You have to build that side. And so you have to do all the development there. I have long maintained that headless content management systems do not resolve any complexity. They just move it around. So instead of it being complicated on the management side, it's now complicated on the delivery side. So those are the coupled models. And depending on which coupling model you'd use, tells you where your development is going to be. Are you going to be developing in your delivery layer? Are you going to be developing in your management layer? Here's a metaphor. I'm back to the food metaphors for some reason. A coupled CMS on the left there, that's like an in-restaurant dining experience. So you go to a restaurant and you sit down at the table, and the waiter comes over to you and he maybe brings you a drink and asks you what you want, and you place your order. Then he brings the food out to you and you consume the food right there in the restaurant. And so the waiter can come back and check on you, or the chef can cook your steak a little longer. Or the waiter can make sure your glass is refilled, offer you a dessert menu. You have an active relationship with the management layer, an active relationship with the kitchen and the server, I would say. And on the other side, the headless CMS is takeout. You go and get your food and you take it home, and how you consume that food is up to you. You got to get your own drink and you got to set your own table. Maybe that's what you want. Maybe you want to eat your food in front of a Sex and the City rerun. If that's what you want, great, then takeout is very much what you want. But the consumption of that food is very much your problem. So that's the difference between a coupled system and a headless system. And so if you think in terms of that, where is your development going to be? If you buy a headless CMS, you still have to develop the delivery layer. The management's taken care of. You have to develop delivery. If you buy a coupled CMS, a lot of the delivery is taken care of. Most coupled CMSs are designed to deliver websites. They have a bunch of tools for delivering a website. So that's the difference between coupled and headless CMSs. Last thing we're going to talk about is CMP and what I call the first 85%. CMP stands for Content Marketing Platform. This is something that a lot of organizations need, but they don't quite realize it. The questions I'm going to ask here, is there a difference between authoring and production? Remember we talked about the difference between a content and artifact, management and delivery? Authoring, we author content, we produce artifacts. Is there a difference? In many systems, there's not. You create the content. At the same time you're creating the content, you're also creating a web page. So you're creating the content and the artifact at the same time. But my question is, if you look at the entire scope of creating content, at what point in the content production process is the CMS really a relevant tool? Like at what point do you engage with the CMS? And we want to think, well, it's all in the CMS, but the truth is it's really not. We like to think of it this way. If we look at our content production process from 0% to 100%, 100% is when we hit publish. We want to say that we log into the CMS at 0%, right? That's where we start our process, and then we do our whole process, and then we hit publish at 100%. But I really maintain this is only about 15% of the entire life cycle of content production. We think this is it, but this is not all it. If you take a step back, so zoom out a little bit, you'll find this. You log into the CMS, I maintain it about 85%, and you publish at 100%. So actually the work you do in the CMS is only about 15% of the content production process in its entirety. So what's the first 85%? For a lot of organizations, they don't know. They have no process. It's a dude shrugging his shoulders saying, well, I don't know. We do some stuff. If you look at 0% all the way back as somebody thinking to themselves, hey, we need some more content on the website. What happens in that first 85%? At a lot of organizations, it's this unholy mishmash of Excel spreadsheets and Slack and emails, and it's just there's no process there at all. And a content marketing platform is an attempt to put a framework around that process. If we look at the entire process of content production, let's start at the very top. I just sketched these out one day. These may or may not be accurate. There's probably some here that I forgot. But if you look at the unexpressed need for content, like your analytics, your ideation, people just saying to themselves, hey, the website's getting a little stale, we need some more content. You know, there's been a change in our industry and we need to address this. And then you have an express need for content. Somebody specifically says, hey, we need this content. And then you review your content, you review your competitors' content, review your analytics, you talk about it. I mean, you just sit around and you're like, well, should we do this? Should we do this? You test fits in various angles. So you start writing a blog post, you're like, no, that's not going to work. This should be an infographic. And you have collaboration. Your whole team is weighing in on this, and they're saying, well, should we do this? Should we do this? Then you have offline content production. This is the dirty secret of CMS. A friend of mine once sent that nobody creates content in a CMS. They just edit it there. And this is true for many organizations. They could have the most advanced CMS in the world, and they'll still open Microsoft Word to start writing a blog post. And then you have an informal review. So you've written this thing in Microsoft Word, and you just start emailing it around and asking people for their opinions. And then finally, someone logs into the CMS. And then you go through this whole process of formally producing an artifact, producing a web page, doing a formal review, and finally getting it published. And this is the entire life cycle. And if you look there, the part below log into the CMS, that's all really the CMS does. What happens in that part above that? Well, that's what a content marketing platform is for. And if you're looking at this and you're saying, well, before we log into our CMS, we have no process whatsoever, then you may want a content marketing platform. And this is the only sales pitch of the session, I promise. This part before the CMS, we're kind of laboring authoring. And then after you log into the CMS, that's production. So you author content, you produce an artifact. And again, this is the only real sales pitch here. We have acquired a content marketing platform. In January, Optimizely acquired a content marketing platform called Welcome Software. And Welcome does some really neat things. Welcome handles things like content ideation. This is where your team can discuss content ideas. They can just collaborate and ideate about what content they could put on the website. They can capture ideas, kind of have a parking lot of ideas they want to do with their content. Also, it's really based around the concept of an editorial calendar. So you can decide this is when our content's going to be released. We're going to do this blog post on this day, and we're going to do this infographic on this day, and this YouTube graphic on this day. And at any given time, you can step back and you can see where all your marketing is going to lay out. Content creation, you actually create content in Welcome. You can actually write it there and collaborate on it there. You can leave comments. You can actually highlight text and leave comments about that. People can edit together in real time. In Q3 of this year, we're going to release a seamless integration between Welcome and Optimizely Content Cloud. So you'll be able to write content in Welcome and just hit publish, and it'll automatically get published over in Content Cloud. What's great about that is I have known from experience that for every one person that's working in the CMS, there's probably 10 people working on content. Not everybody who authors content needs to be in the CMS, and this allows you a really clean separation of the two. Additionally, Welcome allows you to do task management, so you can actually figure out all the tasks that are going to be required to deliver this content and assign those to different people and track those over time. It gives you a review option, so you can see how this content's going to look, and you can send it through kind of detailed workflow, have everybody look at it and review it. And then also it offers a level of asset management. You can use this as a place to store all your rich media assets that you use in multiple content objects and track those over time. So that is what a content marketing platform is. It is a separate piece of software from a content management system. Now, at Optimizely, we've always done a content management system. Optimizely Content Cloud is our flagship content management system. But we kind of felt that people were just going to our CMS at the 85% part. We weren't handling that 0 to 85%. And we wanted to do that, and so that is what led us to acquire Welcome, which we're going to be integrating into our suite. So that's the only sales pitch I promised you this entire session. And with that, this session is done. Thank you very much for joining us for session 2. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you.